Moscow, June 6, 1799. Russia was still ruled by emperors. Serfdom still defined society. French was the language of the aristocracy. Russian, the language of peasants. Into this divided world, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin was born. He would grow up to unify a language, challenge authority, and become the foundation of Russian literature. But his story is not only about poetry. It is also about exile, censorship, pride in African ancestry, political suspicion, and a fatal duel that shocked an empire. Pushkin was born into a noble family in Moscow. His father came from an old aristocratic line. His mother descended from Abram Petrovich Gannibal, an African brought to Russia in the early 1700s. Gannibal became the godson and protégé of Peter the Great, rose through military ranks, and earned noble status. This lineage mattered. In a society obsessed with hierarchy and bloodlines, Pushkin carried both aristocratic privilege and visible African ancestry. He was proud of it. Later in life, he would begin writing a novel about Gannibal, determined to preserve that legacy. As a child, Pushkin was immersed in French literature. Like most Russian nobles, his family spoke French more often than Russian. But it was through Russian folk tales, told by his nurse Arina Rodionovna, that he absorbed the rhythms of the Russian language, rhythms he would later immortalize. At age 12, he entered the Imperial Lyceum at Tsarskoye Selo, an elite institution created to educate future statesmen. It was there that Pushkin's genius became undeniable. By the time he graduated in 1817, Pushkin was already known in literary circles. But his poetry carried something dangerous. He wrote about liberty. He criticized autocracy. He sympathized with reformers. In 1820, the government exiled him from St. Petersburg for what officials considered subversive verses. He was sent south to the Caucasus, Crimea, and later Moldova. Instead of silencing him, exile expanded his imagination. The landscapes of the Caucasus inspired romantic, dramatic poetry. He absorbed influences from Byron and European Romanticism, but reshaped them in Russian. During this period, he began writing what would become his most famous work, Eugene Onegin. Disconnected from everyday speech, Pushkin changed that. He blended classical structure with conversational Russian. He elevated the spoken language into art. Eugene Onegin was revolutionary. A novel written in verse, filled with psychological depth, irony, realism, and social observation. He later wrote Boris Godunov, a historical drama exploring power and legitimacy. The Bronze Horseman, a haunting meditation on state power and the individual. The Captain's Daughter, a historical novel about rebellion and loyalty. Writers who came after him, including Fyodor Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy, and Ivan Turgenev, openly acknowledged their debt to Pushkin. Without him, the golden age of Russian literature might never have happened. Pushkin's relationship with the state was complicated. After the Decembrist revolt of 1825, an attempted uprising by reform-minded officers, Pushkin fell under closer surveillance. Tsar Nicholas I personally assumed the role of his censor. Imagine that. The emperor himself reviewing your manuscripts. Pushkin was allowed to return to Moscow and later St. Petersburg, but his freedom was limited. Financial difficulties mounted, gambling debts increased, court politics suffocated him. Yet he continued to write, with precision and brilliance. In 1831, Pushkin married Natalia Goncharova, celebrated for her beauty. But St. Petersburg society was ruthless. Rumors spread that a French officer, Georges Dantes, was courting Natalia too closely. Pushkin felt his honor attacked. In January 1837, he challenged Dantes to a duel. Dueling was illegal, but still practiced among the aristocracy. On January 27, 1837, Pushkin was shot in the abdomen. He suffered for 2 days before dying at age 37. The government feared public unrest. His funeral was conducted quietly. Crowds were restricted. But grief spread across Russia. A cultural giant had fallen. Today, Pushkin is not simply admired. He is foundational. His birthday, June 6th, is celebrated as Russian Language Day. His works remain required reading across Russia. Statues of him stand in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and cities worldwide. More importantly, the modern Russian literary tradition begins with him. He proved that Russian, not French, could carry epic drama, psychological depth, humor, and national identity. And he did so as a man whose ancestry traced back to Africa, a fact he never denied, never erased. Alexander Pushkin did not just write literature. He created the voice of a nation. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel.